What makes a good consultant? I've already said the majority of staff within Strathclyde Business School are engaged in business research and consulting. But that is not to say that every academic makes a good consultant. There's a number of things that I think are very important, and I've put a few up in the slide here. I mean, intellectual ability, that goes without saying, obviously. You need to know your subject, you need to be confident in what you're saying. But another really important, another important area is people skills. To be a consultant, you're going to have to work with clients, you're going to have to carry out research involving other people. And that does mean that you're going to have to be able to not just talk to people, but listen to people as well. So people skills, very, very important. Now, a consultant, an important part of a consultant is that people listen to the advice the consultant gives. So it's not just that you can talk, it's not just that you can listen, but it's actually that you can persuade people, convince people, motivate people to do things. So it does take a certain amount of gravitas, if you like, confidence in what you're doing, to be able to persuade people and motivate people. And again, that's not for everybody. You need a certain amount of intellectual and emotional maturity. And what do I mean by that? Well, you know, sometimes when you're acting as a consultant, there are issues that you've got to deal with. Perhaps staff that aren't doing what you want them to do. Or perhaps you hit a problem with a client. Or perhaps the client has issues that need to be discussed. It's not all nicey-nicey in the consulting world. You've got to be able to take a few hard knocks, and you've got to have the maturity to be able to do that and not take it personally. You also need to have drive and initiative, because it is tough. You know, you might be working long hours. You might have obstacles to overcome. So you really have to be, you know, keen in what you're doing and engaged in it. And the last point there, a good consultant, as I hope I would say the same of a good student, has to have the ability to reflect. They have to work ethically, and they have to have integrity. Now, at Strathclyde Business School, I hope all our staff who are working with industry have these things. They work ethically, they have integrity, and being scholars as well as consultants, I would hope that we're quite good at reflecting, that we look at things that we do, we learn from our mistakes, and we look at what we could do better next time. So to me, that's some of the things that I think makes a good consultant. And I hope you'll go away and reflect on these and think about whether or not you're cut out to be a consultant. Take a few minutes now maybe to look at why companies are coming to Strathclyde Business School at the moment. What are the kind of hot topics, if you like, in terms of business research and consulting? Now, I've put a few on a slide here, the things that are seen as being current hot topics. Now, this is largely from my own personal experience. One of the things that I do as Vice Dean of Knowledge Exchange is I look across the business school at the activity that we're doing in terms of KTPs and executive education and consulting and all these things. So these are kind of the topics that I see most commonly. Strategy and growth. A lot of companies come to us and say, where should we go next? And to be able to help a company develop strategy, there's a number of skill sets that you need to have. And again, Strathclyde Business School, the departments of Management Science, Strategy and Organisation are kind of big players in that kind of particular field. And sometimes what we might do is we might be working with the management team, we might be looking outside the organisation, we might be involving the Department of Marketing, thinking about what's the competition, what are markets. But very much that's an area that we do help organisations in. And again, student projects. So a lot of student projects that are helping organisations to think about their growth areas and think about their strategy. Now, cost reduction. Everybody's interested in reducing their costs in this current environment. Strathclyde Institute of Operations Management that I talked about before, very much part of that, you know, that's the focus of what we do. We try and improve processes. It's not all about cost reduction. It may also be about how do we develop processes that add more value to the customer. So some organisations, they're coming to us saying, help us look at our processes, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to cut our costs. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify perhaps things that we're doing where there's duplication or there's waste or activities that really aren't valued by the customer. And that's the kind of activities that I would get involved in my area of operations management research. But very often organisations will be coming to us saying, help us with our processes, because what we're doing is we're changing our business strategy. Perhaps, for example, I do a lot of work with manufacturing companies. And a lot of manufacturing companies in Scotland these days are saying they can't compete on the basis of price. They've tried to cut their costs as much as they possibly can, but now they're seeing themselves having to compete in global markets on something other than price. And the marketing guys will know all about that, and they might have helped them to develop strategies. But what the companies then need to do is they then need to look at their actual activities, how they manufacture things, how they deliver service to their customers. And what they then have to do is they have to redesign their processes, not to think about cutting out costs, but more to think about adding value. So how can we add value perhaps through better design or better service? Governance. Governance. Again, Strathclyde University has expertise in the area of governance. The Departments of Economics, the Department of Accounting and Finance, the Hunter Centre, all of these parts of the organisation are helping companies to think about how they set up their companies, how they structure them, and how they make sure that they're working in an ethical way. Innovation and technology. Quite often companies will come to us and say they want help, for example, with their innovation processes. How can they get better at launching new products onto the market faster, more efficiently? And again, people like the Department of Marketing, the Hunter Centre, Management Science are all kind of key players in that area. Or it might be that the company has a particular issue with business technology. They might be looking for advice on what to invest in and what kind of technologies are going to help move their businesses forward. Regulation and risk. Again, there's an awful lot going on in the outside environment, and many companies are faced with regulation issues, and Strathclyde Business School can help them with that. For example, if we look at some of our clients at the moment in the energy sector, there is a lot of regulation in the energy market. And researchers from the Department of Economics, from Accounting and Finance, from Management Science are all helping some of companies in that field to deal with the issues of regulation. Other parts of the university are advising the policymakers on what regulations there should be. We've already talked about the risk consortium. Risk is an area where Strathclyde Business School has significant strength. Again, if you think about the industrial market, just sticking for a second with energy that we were talking about a minute ago, a lot of the energy companies are thinking about renewable energy, and they're thinking about investments in, for example, offshore wind power. There's a huge risk associated with that. How much they're investing, how they're going to maintain the equipment there. And again, Strathclyde is doing a lot of work in that particular area, but that's not the only sector that has to deal with risk. Sustainability and climate change. We're all concerned about sustainability, we're all concerned about climate change. And again, very often companies will come to us asking for advice. Now that's an area where personally I've been involved in a lot of student projects that have perhaps helped organisations to think about how they could become more environmentally friendly, how they could perhaps recycle more, how they could use energy more efficiently. But that's not to say it's limited to student projects and placements. There's also some consulting activity and some executive education going on around that area. Talent. Talent is a big issue in organisations today. How do they make sure they've got the right people with the right skills and expertise, particularly when we're talking about an international, when we're working globally? How do we make sure we've got the right people in the right place? And that's very much the Centre for Corporate Connections that I talked about earlier on, very much that's what they're helping companies to do, to identify what are their talent needs, how can they develop people, and how can they make sure that they've got the right skills and they've got the right people in the right places. And finally, internationalisation, and that's not to say it's at the bottom of the list, because it's definitely not. So many companies today, not just big companies, but the small guys as well, are thinking about moving into new markets, to working much more internationally. And that's not just about selling things overseas, it's also thinking about their supply chain and thinking about where they buy their components and their products and services from, and how the whole machine works efficiently when we're crossing international borders. So that's the kind of hot topics that people come to Strathclyde with. Again, I've put a couple of links for you here. There's just 3 kind of links that I've put up, and this is consulting organisations mainly, and their take on what they think the big hot topics are at the moment and in the coming years. So you might want to have a quick look at some of these. Right, I'm going to finish just by reminding you, I suppose, that when we're consulting, what is it we're really talking about? What are the activities that are involved? And when I'm working with organisations, I tend to go back to this kind of cycle diagram that I've got here to help me think about structuring the problem. Whenever you're dealing with an organisation outside the university, it's very much about interacting with the client. So there's probably going to be a good couple of meetings where you get to know each other, they tell me what their problem is, I tell them what kind of capabilities we've got. So there's probably a number of kind of early meetings. And that helps us to structure the problem, to actually identify what is it that is the crux of the matter here, what are we going to focus on in this particular project or consultancy brief. And from that, we then have to think about what data do we need and what kind of an analysis are we going to do. So you've got to think about these 2 things in parallel. You don't just go and collect data and then analyse it. Before you go collect the data, you have to think about what are your tools of analysis. Now, if there's anything you take away from this presentation, that's probably a really major thing. The number of times that I see students who are early in consulting, who are perhaps doing projects in their 3rd and 4th years, very often they make that mistake. They just go out and they collect data, they interview people or they do a survey, but they haven't really thought about what they're going to do with that data and how they're going to analyse it to help the organisation. So please make sure before you collect the data, you do sit down and think about how you're going to analyse it, what are you going to do with it. There might be some modelling required to help you in your analysis. But again, you don't do these things in isolation. You don't just go off and do them on your own. A good consultant will always be interacting with the client, making sure the client is on board, is happy with what you're doing. So again, there's a lot of time in consulting just keeping people informed. It might be face-to-face meetings, but it might just be making sure you're dropping regular emails or picking up the phone. And again, most consultancy briefs do require you to write a report. They might also require you to do a presentation to the organisation. So to me, that's the kind of activities that are involved in consulting. And I'm hoping that, that you as Strathclyde students are going to engage in these activities, if not today, in the very near future. Thank you very much.